This podcast is sponsored by Tusk, an open source non-ICO crypto project powered by community. Check them out on the web at tusk.network. That's TUSC.network. The Rob McNealy program is the nexus of cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, and entrepreneurship. Now, welcome to the program. Hey folks, Rob McNealy here, and we're going to have a really good show for you today. I have a personal friend of mine who I've wanted to get on the show for some time, and I can say that I've been derelict in my duties with getting him on the show. But he is a gentleman I met over a year ago at the Gun Rights Policy Conference, and he is a gun rights activist from the city of Detroit named Rick Ector. Rick, how are you today, and welcome to the show.
First, I am doing great, man, and glad to be on the show. Hopefully we'll have some fun.
We always have fun when we talk.
Right. Like the last time I talked to you was last night, man, and it was just kicking it, and we were on the phone for at least 2 hours, man.
We should have recorded that, but I think we can capture some of that today too. So just so the audience knows where you're coming from, give us a little bit of background about yourself. How did you get into becoming a gun rights advocate?
How did I get into being a gun rights advocate? Wow. How far down the rabbit
as far as we need to go.
Let's say a long time ago, man, maybe 13, 14. I'm going to just hit the highlights. 13, 14 years ago, relatively brand new homeowner. Only firearm I owned was a 12-gauge shotgun, just in case some criminal was brave enough to breach my front door. Lo and behold, one day I got robbed in my driveway, and that changed my life. I went on the so-called classic hero's journey, that formulaic process that is used to tell movies and basic storytelling. I went on this quest to learn more about personal protection and firearms instruction. I took all the classes I could get, and then I felt I needed to learn more, and I became a firearms instructor. And then I became a training counselor to train people to be firearms instructors. And then I still had much to do, man, and I wanted to do more. And I started doing research, and my path crossed that with a gentleman by the name of Ken Blanchard out in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, black man with a gun. And then I found out he was going to be at the Gun Rights Policy Conference one year. And so then I drove to, what was that? Fort Mitchell, Kentucky. I met him, befriended him, and my life hasn't been the same, man. And pro-gun rights advocate. I advocate for lawful carry, whether it's open carry or concealed carry. I advocate for law-abiding citizens being armed and making the world a less safe place for bad guys.
And I know one of the things that one of your claims to fame is that you've helped a lot of the ladies in the inner city of Detroit get trained and certified in the safe handling of firearms. Is that correct?
That is correct, man. I saw a story 9 years ago, man, and it was very chilling. It was a story about a woman whose body was discarded in the street as if it was trash. And I felt that someone should do something about that. And I watched the media, and I didn't see anyone addressing it. And so I had a bit of inspiration. I thought that I would leverage some friendships that I had with fellow trainers in the area, and we put together a training program for women. All they had to do was just show up at a gun range, and we would take care of their range fees, their ammunition costs, give them a gun to use, and give them a range safety briefing to have them shoot a gun. And that first year, man, I had such lofty goals. I was going to train 1 million people that day, but only 50 showed up, so I trained 50 people. And I continued to grow this program. And last year, in the last iteration of this program, we trained 814 women with a range safety briefing and a free shooting lesson. Now I am boldly making plans to train 1,000 women in one day, give them a range safety briefing and a free shooting lesson.
Now, this is all done, of course, with other range safety officers and in a very safe and very safe environment, right?
Oh, yeah, man, definitely. I a literal army of volunteer firearms instructors and range safety officers. There's a huge gun range in Metro Detroit that has blessed us with the full use of their modern gun range. I will have no less than 100 fellow firearms instructors. So as you can tell, I have some really good relationships with a lot of people who believe in this program and what we're doing. And they literally, this is for many of them the highlight of their year. And they do it all for the sake of doing a job well done and feeling really good about what they've done when they leave the gun range that day.
What time of year do you normally do this training?
Usually I do it exactly 1 week after Mother's Day, but with all of the lockdowns that we've had associated with the coronavirus and our governor, you know, I'm going to be nice today, has some very interesting things about public safety and things that need to be done that I just pulled the plug on it. And I said, well, I need to move this event further down the road. And currently now I'm making plans to gear up on Sunday, August 9th to do the latest iteration. And hopefully I won't run into any unforeseen roadblocks to deter me from making good on that date.
Well, you know, keep me in the loop on that. And if the pandemic makes it permissible, I would love to come be a volunteer with you.
Man, I'll tell you, I turn nobody away, absolutely no one. You know, I have, you know, safety is the primary consideration, you know, and the way I make that happen is I make sure that there's one-on-one instruction between the student and the instructor. And we swap out instructors every so often so that we have instructors who aren't daydreaming, wondering if they left the stove on or if they locked their front door or trying to remember where they parked. I want everyone to be fresh, alert, and safety conscious. And you know what? In all the years that I've done this event and all the thousands of women that I gave a free shooting lesson to, we've had actually 0 injuries.
That's really good. So what's been the response to this training typically? You're coming at it from the inner city Detroit, and which is, as we know, a very governed by the left. I'm trying to be very politically correct here, but the city of Detroit is very left-leaning typically and politically, and from the city council on down. Generally, in inner cities, they tend to be politically very anti-gun. What is your response from the community in general with your gun safety program?
You know, we've had some very interesting interactions with people in the political public space, you know, through the length of this project, man. And, you know, there were some people who had some very unnice things to say about it, you know, some things such as, you know, it's the wrong message and that we should, you know, not be in a rush to gravitate towards firearms for personal protection. But, you know, I've always felt that when you looked at the annual crime stats and going back to when this program first initiated, you know, we were perennially leading the country in the number of murders that were happening across the country. And in particular concern to women, you know, we were having the neighborhood of anywhere from 800 to 1,000 reported rapes in the city of Detroit. You know, and this is not the metro area, this is within the city. And anytime you talk to anyone who talks to you about rape, well, the number of reported rapes is significantly less than how many actually occur, because you have the embarrassment, modesty, wanting to be anonymous factor. You know, there's various multipliers that you can apply towards the reported rape counts to try to get a handle on how many are actually occurring. So really, this is my annual tribute to women. I have women who are in my family. I have, you know, daughters, I have aunts, you know, I have women who are friends. And this is the one thing that I typically in any given year can put my hand on and say, I did a really good thing. And this is the sentiment that is experienced by a lot of people who are participating in this program. It's like a really great thing to do. And it feels great to make a contribution to do something that empowers people, man, and make them more secure in their life, you know, as a Detroiter and as a Michigander.
So it sounds like the women in the area support it, but the government folks are less supportive of it. That's kind of interesting, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting, man, but you know, and you know what, when you talk about the days in which we find ourselves, it's really an interesting contrast. But see, typically in years prior to now, you know, there's always this concern that, well, maybe I'm, you know, contributing to the problem. And I'm like, no, I'm empowering women, and I'm actually making the community safer, because with the more people who carry guns lawfully and get concealed carry permits, it actually acts as a buffer to people who hate guns and don't carry guns. So just the mere fact that there's a proliferation of people carrying guns, you can be anti-gun and be safe. Well, one of the interesting things that we're finding out now in this now new world we're finding ourselves with the coronavirus, we're discovering that, yes, law enforcement officers are human too, and they sometimes find themselves subject to be infected with the coronavirus, and their ability to stay virus free has had a significant impact on their ability to field their departments and actually patrol and enforce the law. So it's actually a selling factor, if you will, to get more people to take part in this program, for the simple fact that, you know what, anything could happen, and at the worst case, you are your own first responder, and you can do the best thing you can do to make you and your family safe is to be prepared to defend yourself and the life of your family. So, you know, over the years, this program has grown by leaps and bounds. You know, I get good feedback from people that participate in it, testimonials, positive news stories. And, you know, there's very few people who can come out publicly and say that they're against the program. I mean, because after all, if it wasn't for their failures in safeguarding women, then this program wouldn't have a need to exist.
So you brought up an interesting point about the police department and in Detroit specifically getting infected with COVID. Now, I was following that for a while because, and you and I have talked, I'm actually originally from Metro Detroit. I actually grew up 2 miles from the city limits of Detroit. And how many cops have been out because of Corona that you're aware of in the city of Detroit?
Oh man, I wish I had that data handy, but there was one point a very short time ago, maybe a few weeks back, when there was a real concern that there were so many police officers who either had it and were suffering with it, or who were under quarantine for the simple fact that they had contact with people who had confirmed cases of coronavirus, that they were seriously entertaining the idea of totally restructuring their department and working with other law enforcement agencies in the region to make sure that we had adequate coverage. And of course, if you've been following the news media, our very own police chief, Chief Craig, actually came down with the coronavirus and took himself off the playing field so that he could heal. Fortunately for us and for him, you know, he was able to make a full recovery and he's back on the job. But that just merely highlights the fact that this coronavirus, you know, we're just now learning more and more about it. We're learning that it's not as dire as what we once thought it was, that as many people are not as susceptible to it as we thought, but it's still out there and it could still have an impact and an effect on public safety. So, you know, in the end, I'm all about empowering people and empowering their communities. The more people who are trained in firearms, the more people that carry, the more guns that we have in the homes, the better off and the safer we are going to be. And I stand on that, man. And every time I do this program, I feel like I've done a really good thing. You know, if by the time I eventually leave this world, if someone has the job of putting an epitaph on my headstone, they could put something on there that's a testament to how many women that I helped safeguard and train over the years. I think that would be a fitting tribute.
So what is the number so far? How many women have you actually trained and exposed to firearms in the Detroit area?
Well, just with regards to just this program, man, we're very close to 4,000 women that I've trained through this
Wow.
free program. And, it's a one-day event, 1 day a year, thing. So, it's kind of skewed because I only do this program 1 day a year. But, man, we train so many people in 1 day. It's just mind-blowing that we actually do it and we make it happen. And, I'm surprised it's not national news, man, but the local news media come out and they cover it. And, and I'll post the clippings, the digital clippings on my YouTube channel and all that other stuff, man. But it's a big deal, man. I think if I hit 1,000, I think the national networks won't be able to ignore me then, not credibly anyway. But you talk about a guy and his gang of volunteers actually training 1,000 women how to use a firearm. Well, I don't think even the news media can ignore that.
Do you do this at an outdoor event, or do you do this at more than one range at a time, logistically speaking?
Well, I'm at a point where I'm going to have to start thinking about branching out maybe to more ranges on the same day. But as of right now, it's all at one range. A few years back, or shall I say several years back, I started running into a capacity problem. And well, anytime you do things and you experience rapid growth, you're going to have to take a step back and look at how you do things. And so one of the innovations I came up with was splitting the day up into various shifts. So instead of having, say, 1,000 women all show up at a gun range at 8 o'clock in the morning, I decided to break the day up into several shifts, like maybe 7 or 8 shifts. And through the registration process, they would sign up for a specific shift and a time period. And so that model has carried me all the way through now. And it might get me through maybe another iteration. But at some point in time, if this program continues to grow, I am definitely going to have to use more gun ranges or make it more days. I haven't figured out yet how I'm going to proceed, but one way or another, it's going to grow by the number of days or the number of locations.
So do the women actually get a CCW from this, or is this just like an intro exposure kind of seminar?
Nah, it's not a class where they're going to get their carry permit. That's an 8-hour class. And you start multiplying that by 1,000, man. Now we're talking about some serious training that physically and through the sheer laws of physics couldn't be done in a day. But you know what? Maybe I just don't have the resources. But right now, this is pretty much a introductory kind of class. Bring them in. You give them the fundamentals of firearm safety. You run them through the basic safety rules. You give them demonstrations in terms of gun handling and shooting stances, and then they're one-on-one with a firearms instructor in the booth. We do a big informational session where they get all this information up front, and then we line them up and we march them through the gun stalls with one-on-one with a firearms trainer, and then we shove them out the door and we welcome the next wave of students in.
Nice. Do you know how many of those actually do decide to go on to get further training and get their CCW? Do you follow those stats around?
No, there hasn't been a really good way to track that, man. But I'll tell you, every time I do this event, there's a number of women who've gone through it at some point before. And maybe there's a few that took a few years off, or they'll go every other year. And then, believe it or not, there's always a legion of women who come every single year and never miss a year. But that's primarily how it grows. Social media has been a big publicity engine. Like I said, I don't get any national coverage about this program, but I'll tell you, when you have literally hundreds of women all on the same day posting pictures of their targets, their silhouettes, and the pretty holes they put on them, You know, it's almost like I'm breaking the internet, at least locally here in southeastern Michigan. And you can't go on social media without seeing a picture and all these great smiles that people are having about all the fun that they had. And believe it or not, there's always some people who never heard of the program, believe it or not. And they happen to hear about it during that last iteration. And now they're here and they do it. And then I tell you, you know, they all, to a person, they're happy that they were a part of the program, and they tell their family and friends about it. And so we've grown organically, you know, from 50 to 814, man. So onward to 1,000.
Well, I think you're going to get there. And I think you're taking the right approach. I know whenever I've taken just one-on-one friends of mine that are no gunners that are interested, especially people that are liberal, which is the best part, is that once they go through the safety and the basics of a gun and get over that initial kind of, you know, fear that they might have, they almost always get hooked, almost every time. And I think what part of the problem is out there is that I've seen, at least, is so many people who have zero experience with guns. All they know about guns is what they've seen on TV. And especially when people come from states where guns are largely illegal or verboten, you can say. And then they come out here. It was interesting. I had a friend of mine who's an attorney out of New Jersey and New York. He lives in Jersey, works in New York. And he came out here. He comes out here for business every now and then. And I took him out to the desert one night or one afternoon while he was here. And I picked him up from his hotel. I said, well, let's go shooting. And, you know, I started just pulling out the stuff from some of my rifles and stuff from my garage. He's like, you have all this stuff? And he's like, yeah. He goes, every one of these things is illegal where I come from. And I go, well, let's shoot. And then it was funny because by the end of the day, he's like handing me his phone. He's like, take a video of me shooting. He's like, people aren't going to believe this back home. And
Right.
it was a really good time. And I think that's a really good way to get people interested in guns. Just don't bore them with an 8-hour class, but just give them an exposure kind of thing, you know, demystify it a little bit.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if they feel the
I
need,
got a
then
story of my own that mimics yours.
tell me about it.
There was this woman who was making plans to come to my event, and she had a family member from out of state, from Chicago, Illinois, of all places, who was very anti-gun. And when this visitor came to visit one of my program registrants, the host said, well, look, you have a choice. You can either wait here for a few hours, or you can come with me to the gun range for this program. And so literally she dragged this lady from Chicago, kicking and screaming the whole way to the program. And so they both went through the range safety briefing. They both got their shooting lessons done. And that one vehemently anti-gun lady from Chicago is just smiling from ear to ear. And literally you can see tears forming in her eyes of joy. And I turned an anti-gunner who had no experience with guns at all into someone who's extremely interested in firearms and personal protection. And it just goes to show you, man, that a lot of times people are programmed by a lot of things that they see and hear in the news and in the media, whether it's popular culture in the films. You actually take them to a gun range and give them some training, put a gun in their hand and let them shoot. The first thing they'll find out is, one, that it's a lot of fun. And two, they find out that gun owners are people just like themselves, normal, good, decent, wholesome, law-abiding citizens, and that, yeah, there's a place for gun ownership in America and in their communities too.
Well, I think what I've seen when I've talked to a lot of people is that where they get excited about it, and I think maybe the tears of joy, it's the empowerment piece that's pretty important, that a lot of people are petrified and they're scared, especially women, especially in inner cities, that they have no way to defend themselves, no means of, you know, self-protection. I say it's interesting, you know, lately as we're recording this, we're in the middle of, you know, protests and the riots seem to be slowing down nationwide. But what we've seen here, whereas there is a very righteous cause in there where, you know, police brutality is a problem. And I think a lot of people, especially on the white side of the aisle, is there an aisle for white people? But I think a lot of white Americans don't really realize that police brutality can be a problem. But what we're seeing now, and I think what happened over the last couple of weeks, is the entire country just got the shit scared out of it from the riot part, right? And I do believe there's a lot of outside antagonists trying to subvert peaceful protesters for their own purposes, and we can get into that discussion probably on another show. But I think what happened is the numbers show me, and I say whatever's come out, whatever comes of the protests and the riots, what you do know is that white America and not inner city America just got the shit scared out of it. and I say the numbers of how many background checks and purchases of guns have happened in the last 2 weeks support that. And I think people are scared. And, even if they don't understand or have a dog in the police brutality and civil rights movements that are here, people watch people getting their businesses looted and their businesses burned, and it scares them. And I think when people, like I've seen, it's interesting, I have a lot of friends in New York and LA, and they have no way to protect their businesses or their houses or anything else, and they're scared. They're scared to death. And I couldn't imagine being in that position personally.
Well, man, once I got through my own personal experience, I personally don't know how people walk in polite society without a gun, but that's me and my personal experiences that I've had. But I'll tell you what, just from all of the news coverage of the riots and all the demonstrations from all over the country, all that really has done from a gun standpoint has just fueled another wave of people who are afraid and are frightened. And now there's another background check frenzy going on. And now there's another gun buying frenzy that's going on. And the thing is, man, guns have been selling like hotcakes for so long. Many dealers are having problems keeping guns and ammo in stock. So, it's one of those things where, you wonder, what came first, the chicken or the egg, man, or whether it's demonstrations and or violence and gun sales, man. They're just two reciprocal processes that keep feeding into one of themselves. And I'll tell you, man, there has never been a greater period in recent memory for gun sales as I can recall now. If you look at any graphs over the last, 15, 20 years or so, we're probably at the highest it's been in like 20 years, man. And it could probably go further. I just wonder about from the supply side, can we get more guns into the supply chain? I know ammo has already been a problem in some places in the country. And for those of us who have gone through these cyclical periods, typically at every presidential election, every 4 years, we know that every 4 years, ammo usually gets scarce anyway. So this year it's doubly and triply so. So hopefully people have stocked up early. And if they haven't, man, go to your local gun shop and get what you can now. So in case you need it later, you'll have it.
So Rick, what you're saying is so like pretty typical, like the pandemic and all the politics is going on lately and the riots. We've sold more guns, I think, this year in 2020 than we have probably in the last 20 years. Would you say that's probably going to be where we're going here?
That's where we're going, man. And you know what? We're just half the year is not even done, man. There's still a lot of time to dwarf numbers from previous years, man. But as a gun rights advocate, I feel that it's a good direction. If you ask me, man, more guns, more safety, more empowerment, and creates a more treacherous working environment for bad guys.
Would you say that the gun debate is over at this point, given the number of new gun owners that are coming into the market? Do you think that the gun control is just dead now?
Well, at this point in time, they are having a really tough time justifying their positions, man. But for those of us who've been around for a while, we know that, when things settle down, assuming that they do, that we'll be lulled back into a safe sense of security, and then people will get lax. Hell, a lot of these anti-gunners who just bought up all these guns, they'll probably sell their guns, and we'll wait until the next crisis or next event happens that spurs another, surge of buying. I'll tell you, just from being involved in the community and in this field of endeavor, man, you in it for a while and you start to see cycles, and it's just another cycle.
So has there been rioting in Detroit like there has been in New York and LA?
No, there hasn't been any rioting. There have been some demonstrations, and you know what? As big as an advocate as I am for the Second Amendment, I am a huge advocate of the First Amendment. There have been some troublemakers a couple nights after nightfall, but those were those, and I think it's those Antifa folk, man, troublemakers. But I was looking at the stats that were published in the media, and the vast majority of them were outsiders. I'm talking about 80% of the arrests that people made, that the law enforcement community made, were from outside of the Detroit boundary. There were people who were coming in from outside of our community who, in my opinion, were here just to be agitators and try to egg things on. By all means, if you feel that there's something you need to speak out on and to assemble and demonstrate, by all means do that. I ran a demonstration of my own on the Thursday before these protests.
I
like to sell myself and every.
You just killed my segue. I was going to segue right into that. You just killed my setup, right, dude. All right. But so let's talk about that. That was one of the big things that I wanted to talk to you about today, is you recently organized a big event at the state capitol in Michigan. So tell me about that.
Well, I wanted to, in a very public fashion, state the things that were on the minds of many people, especially people of color, blacks and Hispanics and other racial minorities, that, that when we see incidents like this occur in the national media, whether we're talking about the Breonna Taylor case, or we're talking about the Ahmaud Arbery case, or we're talking about George Floyd, man. And, and I get it, there are concerns and there's issues that need to be dealt with. But, what I wanted to do was to put on an official demonstration, a rally at the Capitol, and say, hey, hate has no place in our society. It's going to take all of us to address it. Fortunately for us, the issue is really not as rampant as I think some people in the media would have us believe. But you know what? It is a problem, and let's address it. And we did so peaceably at the Capitol here in Lansing, Michigan. It was the first event I did outside of Metro Detroit. I was really wondering if I was going to be able to pull enough people from across the state to meet up there for a decent meetup, man. But you know what? I had people come out from Lansing, people come out from Grand Rapids, people who came out from Detroit, and, from otherwhere. We even had a couple people come over from Chicago, Illinois. So it was very satisfying. And there's still people here who, they're reluctant to, leave their homes, and they're reluctant to let alone travel halfway across the state, man. But our first iteration, it was well received. And the thing that I'm really shocked by, man, is that, I've been really receiving a ton of feedback of people who are telling me they wish they had known about it, because had they known, they would have actually, made the trip up to Lansing. So, I think there's an interest there, and you know what? We may do it again.
I think that's important. And one of the things that I've seen and that I would like to see changed, especially in some of the more legacy gun rights groups, say maybe the NRA, is it would be really nice to see more outreach to the Black and minority communities. And I don't just mean that in a pandering way. And everybody's like, we got to get more people from the inner cities, and everybody wants to get, more people that are minority. But I'm talking like sincere outreach, because I do believe that many inner cities politically have been led down this path that disarmament is okay and that guns aren't a good thing, and that there's a lot of stereotypes that I think the narrative that's spun by many politicians on the left, that guns are just a redneck white thing and guns are just, you know, tools of white supremacy and things like that. And, you know, at least my understanding of a lot of history with gun permits and things like that, were the opposite, is that, you know, guns were originally, you know, gun control was originally a racist concept in many places. What's your take on that?
It is. It is. Well, you just basically nailed it in a nutshell, man. Gun control really has absolutely nothing to do with guns. It's all about the control of guns from Black people. And it's not for their safety. It's actually to keep Black people from being able to defend themselves from racists and from the government. You know, back when, you know, slavery ended, you know, Black people needed to have guns, and they owned guns ever since slavery. And the thing that I tell people about is a case that happened here in Detroit in 1925, which predates the modern civil rights movement, was a case of a physician here in the city of Detroit. And this doctor, Ossian Sweet, he moved into a previously all-white community, and the local neighbors didn't appreciate it. And there were hundreds of people who were literally camped out in front of his house every day, chanting all sorts of dreadful, unpleasant things. Well, this one evening, you know, they fired into his home, and luckily for him, he had friends over who also brought their guns, and they returned fire. 2 people in that mob were killed, and then the police, who were there just to merely observe and report, you know, they finally stormed the home and arrested everyone. And this case in 1925 was a groundbreaking case. This was before normal protections that people take for granted, such as Miranda and the right against self-incrimination, and having an attorney provided to you free of charge, you know, things that we just take for granted, man. But in 1925, Dr. Ossian Sweet was represented by Clarence Darrow, who was a famous lawyer of that time. And believe it or not, the NAACP, that's not the same NAACP of today, they actually paid his legal fees. But at the end of the day, Dr. Sweet was exonerated of every charge. But that case is significant for another reason. It's significant because here in the state of Michigan, Michigan enacted the Michigan Firearms Act in 1927 as a direct response to that case. And as a result of that case, the most onerous, restrictive gun laws ever devised were put on the books here in the state of Michigan, and it was devised and implemented only for one purpose, so that no Black person could defend themselves from a white racist mob ever again. Fortunately for us, through all of the legal challenges and court cases and elections through the years and the decades, we here in the state of Michigan have gotten most of those gun laws taken off the books. And Michigan is a fairly decent state with regards to gun laws, but gun rights advocates such as myself are always working to make sure that they are made better from a gun owner's standpoint. And you made reference to the Philando Castile case in Philadelphia, which happened, you know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And that case to me is very significant as it relates to Black people, because in the aftermath of that case, if you remember the details, it was a gentleman who was with his woman, and they were stopped by the police. And based on what version of the story you believe, he was reaching for his identification, and the police shot him thinking he was reaching for a gun. Well, in the aftermath of that case, man, many people in the Black community were looking for a gun rights organization, ostensibly the NRA, to come out and make a statement, man. And they never really addressed it formally. And I think that that was a missed opportunity for the NRA.
Well, the reason why, Well, I want to stop you right there. Is the point that you're trying to make is that Philando Castile did have a gun on him at the time. However, he was a licensed concealed carry holder and was absolutely within the law by having that gun on him at that time. I'm sorry, I just wanted to throw that out there because that's, I think, an important detail here about this case. Now, continue about the NRA.
That's very important. And in the aftermath of that case, man, many people in the Black community were like, "Oh man, how awful, how dreadful, how could this thing happen?" And they were looking for someone to make a statement, man, someone to make a stand. And a lot of them were turning to the National Rifle Association, and they did not make a statement. But what I will say is, to the credit of one of their personalities, what's the brother's name out of is he from New York? What's the Black guy from the National Rifle Association?
Not sure.
He came out and made a statement, man. And he came out and made a statement, and he said everything that we wanted the organization to say, but they didn't. And at the end of the day, another organization, the National African American Gun Association, which was at the time a fairly new group that was formulated, their membership ranks swelled. And now they're the most significant minority gun rights group in the country as of right now. And I think that just really speaks to the reluctance of the NRA to pick up that mantle and say, hey, you have a place here. I think the NRA, and let's understand that I'm not being critical of the NRA. I'm a life member of the NRA. I'm a member of their group that is part of the committee that gets the word up about the NRA and why it's good for them to join the NRA. And I'm a big booster of the NRA. I just think it was a missed opportunity for them to take a stand and say, hey, this case was wrong, and that Mr. Castile should not have been, killed in that fashion, and that gun rights is very important. And we need to fight injustice wherever it occurs, wherever it rears its ugly head. But, at the end of the day, Black people have found an organization that I guess that is catering to, their issues. And I continue to hope that they continue to do well. And I do hope at some point in time the NRA does in a more ostensible fashion makes it known that they want people of color to be in the organization.
Do you think it had to do more their lack of making a statement? I would say the silence, right? Do you think it had more to do with race, or do you think it had more to do with the fact that the NRA is very pro law enforcement, or do you think it's a combination?
It's possible that it's a combination of the both, but I'll tell you this. It is, believe it or not, and I'm a living example of it, it's possible to be pro law enforcement and be against, bad cops, whether they have bad training or there's some bad animus there, or they actually just don't like the people that they're discharged with protecting, which we've seen in this last case with George Floyd, man. But at the end of the day, man, we have very few bad cops out there, man. But the bad cops that we do have out there, they create a very bad situation for everyone. And the point that I think a lot of people are making right now is not only do we take issue with bad cops, we take issue with silent cops who see bad cops do bad things and just stand by and do nothing. And if we can look at our nation's reaction over the last week or so, man, I think we all agree that it's unacceptable.
And I think I don't see how anybody can, at a high level, not agree with that. And I think ultimately, at least with law enforcement, I mean, I'm a mixed guy. I normally don't necessarily have a problem with cops, but growing up, I have had problems with cops. Even, I grew up kind of poor, and I didn't come, from a big rich family or an affluent family. And I would say even in the whiter suburbs of Detroit, there's a lot of bad cops that mess with white people too. I mean, cop abuse happens everywhere. And I think part of that is this like thin blue line, unaccountable culture. Like, where else can you have it that we investigated ourselves and found nothing wrong? Where else would that fly in the world? I mean, other than in law enforcement, it's really kind of absurd if you think about it. And I think that's where people are getting, frustrated with the fact that I think in a lot of cases you get some bully cops. Let's just be honest. I think there's a lot of bully cops out there, but is that there's something about the culture in law enforcement that, I don't know if it's that thin blue line, mantra, philosophy, whatever you want to call it, is that a lot of these cops will cover for which is arguably very egregious behavior of their colleagues. And that's the shocking part in my mind, how this culture has festered. And I do believe people should righteously protest this, because it's become a problem. And it's been a problem for a long time. And I don't know how to fix it, though. But I think definitely it's ridiculous.
I don't know how to fix it either.
I don't have the solution.
Hopefully, some of the... Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. We're good.
Okay, good. I lost your video, but as long as you can hear me, that's fine. The thing that I think most people are taking a big hard look at, man, is that we're what's the alternative? There's a lot of people on the left who are right now. I believe the mayor of Chicago is the latest one I think I've heard within the last day. They're envisioning a world in which we don't have law enforcement officers. There's a lot of people out here saying we need to disband the police and not have any police. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and suggest that everything is perfect with the police, but man, I'm not advocating no police at all. I mean, what are you going to replace that with?
Here's the thing. One,
Nothing?
I can get a whole political discussion, but I don't believe that any government entity is going to disband their police. They may call them something else. They may fund them a different way. There's no way they're getting rid of cops, because cops serve very important roles for government as far as collecting revenue for the government. And enforcing their regulations. So I have a hard time believing that anybody's going to defund or get rid of cops. I just don't believe that's going to happen. Or if I think it'll probably be I think it's political speak is what they're doing right now. They're pandering. I do believe the politicians are pandering right now.
Well, yeah, pandering would be the word. They're pandering.
Yeah, they're absolutely pandering. I don't believe it. They might call cops something else. They might give them a bunch of extra training, whatever, sensitivity training, whatever thing they want, right? It's not that they don't already have those trainings anyway. They already do have those trainings. So I think they're just pandering. They're going to call it something else. Maybe they'll force them to write more tickets to pay for it. I don't know, whatever it ends up being. But I have a hard time believing they're going to give up their MRAPs. I have a hard time believing they're going to give up their machine guns and whatever else they have. They're not going to do that. So I'll believe it when I see it. I just think it's a bunch of smoke and mirrors at this time, to be honest. But my concern is let's just say in their weird fantasy that they end law enforcement, right? Let's just say it doesn't exist anymore. I know this, and you probably know this too. White Americans in the suburbs have all the damn guns. Okay, you want to go find the guns. They're not in the inner cities. Let's just be honest. Most of the guns in the inner cities that the gangbangers have are pieces of shit guns. I've seen what they look like. That's not the fun stuff. The fun stuff is expensive. That's the one thing that people don't get. The guns are an expensive hobby. The fun stuff is...
the expensive stuff, the ARs, the rifles.
It's expensive.
You know what? You're absolutely right. They're in the country and they're in suburbia, and they are vastly more plentiful than they are in the cities.
Yeah, and my take is, and this is my concern politically, is that, and I'm glad the riots themselves seem to be slowing down, because that had me concerned, but all it would take politically, everybody's fired up right now. Everybody's, amped up. Everybody's really sensitive and raw. And for a lot of valid fucking reasons, excuse my language, but a lot of valid fucking reasons, everybody's wired up right now. Between the lockdowns and the economy and the stress and this, it's just like, I think there's a lot of things all kind of in the mix right now, kind of driving this, to be honest. But I think what would happen is, if some of these riots started expanding, I'm worried what happens if, some white homeowners or some white business owners start defending their property against looters from someone of a different minority class or, a different race, and how the media would spin that. I did hear that, like the mayor and the police chief in Chicago now is like coming out and saying they don't want quote unquote vigilante justice because there was a group of white guys that were basically getting baseball bats and said they're going to protect their neighborhood. Now, I think everybody has a right to protect their neighborhood, to be honest. I am all about citizen patrols. I do not like the idea of vigilanteism, quote unquote. But it's kind of interesting to see how this might play out, where you got law enforcement on one hand proven that they're incapable of protecting property. And I think that's important. The government has proven itself in many cities across the country, dozens of cities across the country, in some of the most wealthy neighborhoods and wealthy parts like Midtown Manhattan. The police are impotent at protecting property. And I don't think that's going to be lost on people. And at the same time, those politicians are saying we need to disarm, not only, basically disarm the police, but then on top of that, they want to prevent vigilante justice. So I don't know where that goes, but I think that most Americans realize that sounds...
It's not a logical argument.
Well, I think the number of guns being sold
is... It's not a logical argument.
It's not.
And it doesn't surprise me that they're making it, but I mean, their movement is going to peter out at some point in time, because hopefully they will see some progress, at least on the prosecution side. And I make no mistake about it, the officer who actually committed the murder, yes, by all means, he is guilty. And I also have some sympathies towards the argument that the law enforcement officers who just watched him kill that guy, they should have some level of culpability as well. I think hopefully we're going to an age, and maybe that thin blue line, maybe we can do something with that and make it go away. If you are with another police officer and he does something criminal, to somehow hold the other officers that are with him just as culpable for that crime as well. I mean, I think that's the logical next step, and I think that it needs to happen. It's just a question as to whether the police unions are going to go for it, or whether we're just going to continue to do the same thing we have been doing and just be surprised that we don't have different results.
Yeah, I'm not sure on the solution, and I hope it gets better, because we don't need more civil unrest in this country. I mean, we got enough problems to deal with just with the pandemic and all the other problems with the economy. And this is just not something that we need right now. But Rick, this has gone by very quickly. How can people find out more about you?
You mean it's over?
We're getting over, but I think we're going to have another one of these pretty soon. So where can people find out more about you? How can they get in contact with you?
Man, I'm definitely not hard to find. If you literally just type my name up in a search engine of choice, man, Rick, R-I-C-K, last name E-C-T-O-R. My blog is Legally Armed in Detroit. I'm on all the social media channels. I have over 2,000 videos on YouTube. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I mean, literally, wherever you are, just look for me.
That's perfect. Rick, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. But you know what? Not only did I have fun this past iteration tonight, man, I enjoyed the 2 hours we were just shooting the breeze last night. Too bad we don't have that stuff archived, man. That was some good stuff we talked about last night.
Yeah, that'll be for the crazy version of the podcast next time. But Rick, I'll talk to you soon, brother. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Rob McNealy program. Make sure you check us out on the web at robmcnealy.com and subscribe to our podcast at YouTube, iTunes, and on the Google Play Store.